Hey, what's up guys? LegalBro here, breaking down another Dave Ramsey video, absolutely skewering businesses that try to scam consumers. Let's get into it.
Because that way you have control of your life. Some stupid butt bank or car company doesn't have control of your life. And you have control of the most powerful wealth building tool that you could possibly have, and that's your income. When you give all your income to a stupid butt bank, you have no money, and you have couch payments, and you have cell phone payments, and you have car payments, and you have Sally Mae payments, and payments, and payments, and payments, and payments, and you work your butt off, and you get to the end of your life broke, and you say, gosh, I hope the government, which is well known for its ability to handle money, will take care of me. This is not a plan, America. Instead, we teach you to actually get out of debt, quit worshiping at the altar of the great FICO, and that means that it changes what you use banks for. You know what I use banks for? Checking account. That's it. Got a debit card on it. Got several of them. Several banks, for that matter. A lot of money in banks, but for running this business and for running our real estate properties and for running our lives and so forth. But that's basically all a bank's good for. And guess what? When you start using a bank just for that, you realize how bad banks really suck. That they're absolutely the most horrendous industry when it comes to customer service. They treat you like garbage. They treat you like a name. And so we recommend small community banks, regional banks at the most, and or credit unions. We tell you to stay away from these behemoth banks because they're going to treat you like crap, and they don't care. If you work for Bank of America, you should get a good job. If you work for Wells Fargo, you should get a good job. Working for a good company, not the one you're working for. They're awful. And here we go again, like the sixth time in 5.
What we have here is a classic display of people assume automatically that if you work at one of these giant places, you're going to be happier, you're going to be wealthier. In reality, Dave's talking about the customer service side. If you are a consumer, why would you consume with these behemoths if they do not offer anything greater? And actually the product may even be less than that. I hope. And oh, by the way, Wells Fargo is known for their scams. Don't take my word for it. Take the CFPB. Take the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the CFPB's word for it. Wells Fargo to pay $3.7 billion for widespread mismanagement of auto loans, mortgages, and deposits. Now, what does that mean? They're wrongfully foreclosing on people's homes or illegally repossessing vehicles. They were misapplying loan payments. This is very consistent with Wells Fargo's business practices. And I say that as a consumer lawyer that dislikes how some of these companies operate. So take that with a grain of salt. But one of the things that I absolutely cannot stand is how companies like Wells Fargo have allowed or permitted consumers with $0 in their account to continue to spend money. And then what do they get? They get charges because you have insufficient funds, right? What's Dave talking about?
For the fifth time in 6 years.
Yep.
Here we go again, George. Tell them what's happening with good old Wells Fargo right now.
From NPR, here's the headline. Wells Fargo to pay $3.7 billion settling charges it wrongfully seized homes and cars.
Billion!
Wow.
With billion!
It's 1,000 millions.
3.7 thousand million.
That's got to be pretty bad. So the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
They didn't just accidentally do this once.
Wow.
Unfortunately, it looks like Wells Fargo might be rotten to the top. It's not just, hey, these sleazy guys in this department are doing something bad. There is only one way to take $3.7 billion that does not belong to you. You have created procedures and policies that are meant to harm consumers at their advantage and to line their own pockets, typically going all the way up to the C-suite. Wells Fargo is publicly traded, so obviously everything that we've seen them do will be open to the public. But I would imagine anybody that is a consumer, a Wells Fargo consumer, should be looking at, did they have a vehicle taken or did they have a home that was foreclosed on, and was it lawful? If you are a consumer who uses Wells Fargo Bank and you have had a vehicle that was illegally seized or a home that was illegally foreclosed on, you need to call someone. Even if you don't know if it was unlawful, you need to call an attorney to talk about it. This is what Dave is getting at here. This is the CFPB action came out.
can do that. They just ordered them to pay billions in fines for this, and Wells Fargo agreed to it, which means I'm guilty.
They did it, which means they did it.
Gosh.
They would not have agreed to it if they didn't do it.
Wow.
You don't pay $3.7 billion just to keep the CFPB happy. You go to court if you're right, but they're wrong. They did it, and the CFPB knocked them in the head. This is awesome.
So here's what happened. People had their cars wrongfully repossessed by Wells Fargo, and the bank took actions that resulted in borrowers wrongfully losing their homes. According to the order from the CFPB, other customers were wrongly and improperly charged overdraft fees on their checking accounts. Yikes.
So the overdraft fee one's really interesting because I think what other consumers have complained about is that Wells Fargo will actually allow you to overdraft your account multiple times. So if you get a cup of coffee and it's $5 and you have $0 in your account, it doesn't stop there. It'll actually allow you to compound and compound and compound. And what do? They get overdraft fees. And then when you don't pay those overdraft fees, they get to charge interest on it. It's just keeping the modern day man down. It's despicable. They don't create products anymore. Some of these banks, you know what their revenue is? Their revenue is scamming people. There's no product, there's no solution to helping people. It's how can we bury these people and then just compound the interest on it. Kind of disturbing to even think about.
Wells Fargo's rinse and repeat cycle of violating the law has harmed millions. More than one of American families, the CFPB director said. I don't know how you pronounce it, or something, yeah.
Wow. That's pretty wild. And so
under
Wells
the terms
Fargo,
of the order, Wells Fargo will pay $2 billion to millions of customers who were harmed, and the bank will pay a $1.7 billion fine.
Let's get into it, folks. Let's take a look at what CFPB did in their agreement with Wells Fargo and what a consumer could still have for a claim against them. I got the consent order here, folks, given away for free down below. Let's get into it. Take a look below. Stipulation. Why is this important? Well, Wells Fargo is agreeing, right? This is a consent order. They agree to what's written in here. Let's take a look at what it says. So we've got, as of June 30th, mortgage portfolio of $250 billion. They've got credit card portfolio of $41 billion, auto loans $55 billion, and they've got consumer loans totaling $29 billion. Okay, yeah, that's pretty significant. We go down a bit further. What do we see? Respondent has provided $1.3 billion in remediation to more than 11 million borrower accounts to address auto loan issues. What's the issue? The servicing is the issue. People are paying for things and not getting credit for it. They've incorrectly applied payments and payment processing problems from at least 2011 to 2022. Pretty significant time period. Respondent. Remember, respondent, anytime you read respondent, we're talking about Wells Fargo. What do we see? Auto loan payments due to various technology, training, customer service, and compliance failures when servicing auto loans. For example, November 2012 to August 2018, if a borrower requested that a payment be applied to principal, branch employees were unable to notify borrowers about past due amounts that a principal-only payment would not cover because Wells Fargo did not make the information accessible to branch employees, resulting in more than 210,000 borrower accounts, which resulted in Wells Fargo providing remediation to borrower accounts of more than 105 million. Oh, as a class action lawyer, I absolutely love this one. Incorrect fees and charges. Remember, respondent, Wells Fargo also assessed borrowers' erroneous fees and interest because of technology, audit, and compliance failures. As an example, from at least 2011 until March 2019, respondent sometimes incorrectly entered the effective date of a payment or omitted it from its servicing system. What does that mean? 26.5 million in erroneous fees assessed, right? Erroneous late fees assessed to more than 688,000 borrowers. That's not a mistake. That's not a one-off, hey, this guy was off to a liquid lunch on a Friday and accidentally misapplied this. We got a bad apple in this branch. This is obviously a systemic problem at this company. And we know from their previous malfeasance that this is an ongoing issue. It's like the cape. If Batman wears a cape that says, hey, I'm fighting justice, Wells Fargo's like, you better not bank with us. We're coming for you. And you're like, what? I thought you were on my side. Going further, repossession-related errors. Here we go. I'm sure this didn't affect anyone's life. Wells Fargo repossessed vehicles despite the borrower having made a payment or entering into agreement to forestall the repossession. Wells Fargo made other repossession-related errors, such as failing to provide legally required information to certain borrowers. 38,000 times Wells Fargo did this. Failed to sell a repossessed vehicle during a commercially reasonable time frame, resulting in Wells Fargo providing more than $40 million in remediation. Wells Fargo providing more than $246 million remediation for repossession related harm involving more than 850,000 borrower accounts. Does anyone else see a problem with this? Oh, I love this one. Gap insurance. Let's say you're driving down the road, you get smoked by a semi truck, right? The old T-bone. And when you originally purchased the car for $20,000, let's just say for the fun of it, we're not going to get into it, you still owe $20,000 on it. And after the demo and you drive it in, they do an assessment and the insurance comes back and says, that car is actually only worth $17,500. Well, what you just got is you've now owe $2,500 on this vehicle because it's not worth the amount you owe on it. That's what gap insurance is supposed to protect. Gap insurance is supposed to protect that amount if you still owe on the loan and the car has decreased in value. Personally, I think it's a waste of money. To each their own, certainly not legal advice, but let's take a look. The auto dealer markets gap coverage to borrowers and is paid the gap. However, borrowers finance gap fees as part of their auto loan at origination, and the gap contract becomes part of the auto loan contract. Good, we know that. If the borrower pays off the loan entirely or the gap contract otherwise terminates, the borrower may be entitled to a refund of the unearned portion. It's just like with warranty. If you had a 5-year warranty and you paid for 2 years and you had 3 years remaining, if at any time you say, hey, look, I don't want this anymore, they now have to basically credit you for the 3 years that went unpaid. That's what this is talking about. Account freezes, really? You guys are stealing money from these people and you're freezing their accounts? This sounds terrible. From 2011 to October 16, when Wells Fargo believed that a fraudulent deposit had been made into a consumer account, basically made on automated fraud detection, right? So some system. They identified the suspect deposit accounts for employee review. And then the typical practice was to freeze the customer that did nothing wrong, freeze their account. The entire deposit along with the customer's other account. This account freeze prevented the customer from accessing any funds in the account, not just the funds of the suspect deposit. So what does that mean? Let's break it down for a second. People have auto loans, they've got home loans, they've got credit cards to pay off, they have all this consumer debt. And what Wells Fargo is doing is, hey, oh, by the way, Joe Blow, your consumer account has been completely frozen because you had a $500 charge for something that we believe is fraudulent. And you're like, but wait a second, I have $20K in that account. Like I have to pay my bills, right? And they're like, we think that the $500 fraud is a significant issue, so we have to freeze the entire account. It doesn't make any sense. So people can't pay their bills, people are defaulting in other areas, and what is Wells Fargo doing? Yeah, they're not making any less money, folks. They're still getting their money. Oh, gotta love this. Heartwarming stuff. Thank God it's a Christmas miracle. Wells Fargo changed its practices of freezing consumer deposit accounts when it suspected that a deposit may be fraudulent where appropriate under circumstances. Can you imagine that, folks? They're finally doing the right thing. This one's near and dear to my heart. Letting people overdraft accounts when they didn't have the money to begin with, just so you can absolutely kick them when they're down. Nice, real nice. That's great, Wells Fargo. Look at that. Wells Fargo sometimes assess fees for overdrafts on consumer debit card purchases. ATM withdrawals at the time the transaction settled, even if the consumer had enough funds available in their account to cover the amount of the transaction. Overdraft fees charged on consumer debit card purchases and ATM withdrawals in such circumstances are sometimes referred to authorized positive overdraft. Consumers are taken by surprise, that makes sense, when they see these incur. And they believe that if they had enough money to cover the relevant transaction when it was authorized, they would not incur an overdraft. Well, that seems reasonable. This always boils back to terms and conditions. Did a consumer understand what they were agreeing to? And is the business being reasonable? Now, obviously here, Wells Fargo has agreed that their practice was not reasonable, right? Because they wouldn't have said they were contrary to consumers' reasonable expectations. What does that mean? Wells Fargo's overdraft practices were unreasonable. You gotta love this one. When a company blatantly admits that they have unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices, in violation of federal law. It doesn't take a genius to figure this one out. I'm sure they're about to have pending litigation related to all of this. But for those of you at home that want to know why they would agree to this, well, they would agree to this because they agree that their conduct was unfair, deceptive, or abusive. Now, whether that shakes out in a way that they could be held liable for other harm, we're going to have to see. And remember, folks, there's absolutely nothing in CFPB's order, to my knowledge, that would prohibit a consumer from bringing a lawsuit against Wells Fargo. Now, the way that you typically see it done is in a class action. It's done on a contingency fee basis. So when somebody is scammed by a company like Wells Fargo, they then find a lawyer. The lawyer would work contingent. And then if the lawyer wins, they would get a cut of the overall proceeds. Sometimes it's best to bring it as a class action because of the fact that if you have a lot of consumers that have only been harmed tens, hundreds, several $1,000s, even though that is still a ton of money and should never happen, you bring it as a class because you have more leverage against the company. The company is worth billions. You have more leverage in a big group than you do as a small one, and therefore they're going to take you more serious. Why? Because all of these businesses operate under the same analysis, which is cost benefit. If we have one person and we can just pay our lawyer to litigate it, well, whatever. If we are exposed to a ton of liability, that is something that a company like Wells Fargo would take more seriously. If you have ever been affected by Wells Fargo and you want to share your story, give us a comment below. Have you ever had your house foreclosed on unlawfully? Have they ever repossessed a vehicle unlawfully? They charge you overdraft fees? Let's hear about it. Let's talk about it in the comments below. If you like this video and more, go ahead and like, subscribe, and comment below. If not, we'll see you next time. Be on the lookout out there.